Twin Peaks I've never watched. Twin Peaks is...
Have you?
There's no scenario in which you get to recommend Twin Peaks to me, a show in which you cannot possibly have any idea what happened if you skip 10.
Okay, no, hang on a second.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever called yourself an 80s kid?
An 80s kid? Not really. I was a kid for part of the 80s, but I was mostly a 90s kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why I asked that because it's not relevant at all to Twin Peaks.
Not relevant
Because
to Twin Peaks.
it was after that. You have
Yeah, I probably should. It seems like it would be up my alley.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I would now watch Lost because I know that the writers had no idea what they were doing. And I've heard mixed things whether or not, who is it, David Lynch, who's the guy who did Twin Peaks? Yeah. Like I've heard mixed things where they're like, actually David Lynch knows exactly what he was doing and every single thing makes sense. He's just never bothered to explain it to anybody. Or if David Lynch is full J.J. Abrams and he likes dropping weird things with no plan of how to resolve it. And I don't need resolution to mysteries, but I need the mysteries to have their own internal logic. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I would be the same.
Did you watch 1899? I'm hesitant to tell you to watch 1899 1 because you're bad at watching shows and it only got one season before Netflix canceled it like Total Monsters.
Did it at least get canceled like...
No, full cliffhanger. One season, cliffhanger. They had plans for 3 seasons. It's the exact same showrunners as Dark, and the Dark showrunners had a plan, and 1899 ended with a cliffhanger, and Netflix canceled it because they're terrible at actually being a television network.
That's not the one where they're on the boat, right?
Yeah.
So I did start watching that one. I'm glad I stopped.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. It's hard to recommend when you know it's still a very good season of television. It's just very frustrating. I mean, Netflix, I don't know why Netflix thinks it should be in the business of doing shows if it's not going to do more than 3 seasons. They just did a crappy 4th season for The Umbrella Academy and only gave them 6 episodes to wrap up the entire series. I dislike the Netflix people. I dislike that stupid idiot in charge of HBO, Discovery, whatever it's called now. People who don't know how to run entertainment businesses shouldn't be in the business of running entertainment businesses. Tech bros are terrible at providing entertainment.
See, I take that personally now because I've been called a tech bro so many times.
Yeah, it's bad. Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland, and across the chat from me is Andrew Greener. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. We're also here to get deeper in the human element. I could go on for an eternity about people and how they think about the process of building complex systems. And I can't think of 2 better people to do that than Kevin and I.
Which is why we really need to get some more guests booked on here. If you've got a topic you'd like to come discuss or rant about, drop us a note and we'll see if we can get you on a future episode. You can go to acceptancepod.com/guest and submit your ideas. And a quick reminder, whether this is your first episode or you've been listening for a while, we wouldn't say no to your going and dropping 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leaving us a nice review. And if you want to leave us a bad review, remember the name of the podcast is My Brother, and Me. Also tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there go by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it.
And a friendly reminder that we are always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with an engineering or product team member, trying to figure out how to solve an agile process problem, or you just can't understand why your favorite app updated everything and is now terrible, we're here to talk it through with you. You can send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com or submit them on the Discord in the User Stories channel, and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up talking to a coworker or something.
On this week's show, we'll hopefully help some people out with some more Reddit questions. But before we get to all of that, let's take a short break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is a segment we like to call User Stories, where we'll eventually hopefully be answering questions that you, the listener, send in. But for now, I think we found some interesting questions on Reddit that we can tackle. All right, I have no idea how to say this name. Muskamiliang? Anyway, a user on Reddit wants to know, do you track team mood? Do you track team members' mood on a regular basis? If so, how? And I think we talked about this in a past episode around, I don't remember why we were talking about this. I thought I don't do it explicitly. I think it's just as like it's a side effect of management style, but I am curious. You've talked about like actually how you think about team member mood. I thought there was an interesting comment from Exploring Complexity who said, isn't the sprint retrospective a good event to do that? And I feel like, sure, I guess sprint retrospectives being a ceremony that should be happening every 2 weeks. I guess so. I guess this is where my answer is sort of one of those, like, the things I talk with my team members about, which is I'm not going to wait until your quarterly review to tell you how you're doing on things. I'm going to talk to you the very day that something happens and we're going to figure out what's going on. So I don't know. I think my management style is probably just constant, not I don't know. It sounds annoying. It's not an annoying level, but it's just constant check-ins and knowing how people are doing. I'm talking with my team members every day. So yeah, I don't know if you have a bigger, higher,
Yeah, so this one's been like a fascination of mine for my entire life, probably, because I'm always interested in the team is optimized, right? And it comes down to that. You look at a team and you're like, what does that fifth person do? And actually they don't do anything other than they allow number 3 and number 1 to communicate better. But because of that,
Sure.
the quality of the engineering is so much better. Like their interface is just, everything clicks so much better. And it's number 5 that's making it all work, right? Like, so I do think about this one a lot. And Google spent a lot of money on this, right? Was it Project Aristotle? I think they spent millions. And I can't remember if it was a different project and Aristotle was side by side, but Project Aristotle was Google's attempt to understand what makes a team, right? Like the chemistry and and I think they boiled it down, if memory serves me well, they boiled it down to, we seek out people who communicate in complementary fashion, not similar fashions. I don't think it was as simple as that, but we seek out people who communicate in complementary fashions, and that was the essence of stronger teams, right?
Sure.
The best example of this was a company out in Pune, India. I was out there and they said, hey, we heard you talking about this and we have a product that we think you might like to look at. And they built exactly what I wanted, right? Which was, they were tracking every single employee, the teams they were in, and then what they were doing regular. This is daily, weekly, monthly, whatever cycles they had. All team members were interviewed on each other. Leaders were interviewed in peers. Leaders were interviewed on their team members. So there was always cross interviews going on. And essentially it was very cool. They actually would run all the data to get the power to run the model nightly. They would, basically all the employees would leave their laptops and they were all powered up. And so they would distribute the load over all the employees' laptops to crunch the numbers for this AI overnight, for this model to run. The challenge that I predicted for them was to break into the Western market. The data you're tracking is gonna make people shudder, right? Like, I cannot track that Jenny is pregnant and that she lives 18 miles from the office. And they had a lot of that stuff in there. And it was like, that is going to be a challenge. Like, I need to be able to turn off all these data points because I just can't track these. But they were optimizing their own company teams where they say, oh, we're seeing a performance degrade in Jeremy, not interested. Obviously not Jeremy because it's not very Pune-like name, but we're going to, reassign Jeremy because he's just bored, right? He's bored of working on this. And so they were optimizing their teams real time, day to day, based on all of this crunching of numbers. They actually, it's funny, I talked to them in the last year. This is like going like 5 years back when I first talked to them. They've actually sunset that project because they couldn't get people to get the data. There's like no way, right? So, but it was a shame because I really liked what they were doing. It was like optimizing the team real time. Like, I'm all about like a company running lean. Like, imagine having a company that you actually were optimizing. I think there's some there's like hope in that. Like, Tony just doesn't answer questions very well on Tuesday because Monday night he goes out and drinks really late with his cousins and doesn't want to answer your questions on a Tuesday. But it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't it feels like the kind of thing which is a solution, not necessarily in search of a problem, but it is, I don't know, the way it's described is like, are you tracking team members' moods on a basis and how? Which makes me think that somebody has identified a problem with team morale, velocity, whatever it is. They think that there's something going on. And so they think that, if we can figure out if a mood is going up and down, if there's things we need to do. And it's one of those things where like, I know I fall into this trap of like, well, what's the software solution to the problem? And this feels like a question aimed at like, what's the software solution to how do I track my team's mood? And I notice that there's something going wrong with the team's direction. And to me, that just feels like the wrong thing to do. If you're a leader of a group, that is just one of the things you need to be aware of and mindful and sort of synthesize on your own. I'm not sure that a spreadsheet where you're trying to quantify feedback from users on your bi-weekly syncs is, I don't know, like I don't love the structure of like track and how feels to me like you're trying to find a solution to a skill set. You as a leader just need that skill set to understand your team's mood. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard for me too because I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one, and then yeah, it's an odd one. Like I am sensitive to the moods of. I always think of a funny story with a guy I picked up because I like stragglers, right? When I find out like, oh, this company's going to let these two guys go, I'm like, no, don't do that. Like give them to me. 6 months we'll train them to be release engineers, right? Like so.
Sure.
I picked up stragglers along the way, and in fintech, I'll always grab the two guys. And I remember one of them he was really upset with me. He's like a cranky old guy, and it took him some time getting used to work for a 23-year-old director. Right? He's like, oh, who's this guy?
Sure.
I'm like, well, I saved your job, so kiss my ass for a bit, and then we'll be fine. But he wasn't talking to me for 1 week, and he was like worse than normal. He's grouch, and it was like I got to like Wednesday, and I was like, dude, what's going on, man? Like you normally just tell me why you're grouchy, and it was because he's like, you're making me do a meeting to talk about like the process and building like agile and all this new stuff, and I don't like leading meetings. I'm like, then don't do it. I'll have John do it. Like and you go
Right.
do something for John and cover for him. So I've always been sensitive to people sort of like, if you're happy and pointing in the right direction, you're getting the right training, then you get the miserable ones. You get the people you can never help. So people's moods are really important to me, but I'm also like, I don't have a wide threshold. It's like
Sure.
people who have that consistent, that ability to be consistently happy. But then if you get the super talented guys who are like 95% of the time, they're just horrible assholes. And then 5% of
Right.
the time they're okay and they do brilliant work. Honestly, I'd rather work with the guys who take twice as long.
Yep.
Just
Same.
for my own sanity and my own mood, you know what I mean? So that's important. But I go back to what you said originally and what exploring complexity says. Yeah, just do Madside Glad.
Sure. In the sprint review.
Yeah, just do Madside Glad and you say, but how do you feel? I'm a little bit sad. I'm a little bit lonely. I'm a little bit hungry. Madside Glad.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, you're
Famous.
gonna have trouble with this one. Oh, no. Is it? Wait a minute. Is it the right name? Yeah. Let's hear how you do this name.
I was about to say it's famous help
All
3572.
right, good.
Yeah. Should I look into getting a mentor? If so, what are the pros and cons of this? And how should I guide the conversation on that? Do I just talk to the person who has been in the industry for a few years ahead of me and just ask them where they feel the market is going, how to get career advancements, how to handle managing people, etc.? I feel like have talked about this in the past a little bit. I am the type of person who it's osmosis to me. I seek out the people I'm going to learn from, but I've never explicitly gone to a person and been like, you're going to be my mentor. We're going to talk about this explicitly. And I know people who have done that. And I'm curious, are you in the category of people who've like explicitly said, I'm going to learn from you and ask them to mentor you?
This is the moment Kevin says I'm his mentor. This is where ladies and gentlemen, this is where I find out I'm Kevin's Mr. Miyagi.
Exactly right.
Yeah, here's the thing about a mentor. I think your expectations of a mentor, mine are one or two nuggets, right? Like I've reduced my expectation of how much a mentor is going to influence, but there's always one or two nuggets. And the best mentors are the ones that either communicate that early or you finally get the message, right? Like sometimes they're not able to say it, but you're missing it. And then eventually you figure it out. For example, like I think one of my challenges and one of the things I've consistently got from my mentors is you can walk into a room and you can do a very, very good job of explaining the technical problem, But talk about the solution, right? Like talk about the solution, or you're talking about a solution. Tell us what problem you're solving, right? So there's
Sure.
it's sort of like that's been some good things. There's been really good things that I've got from mentors. And then I like to think that with the juniors that I'm working, I'm trying to give them like, hey, you can't shortcut this. You're going to have to get burned, but just know that we all got burned, right? So then there's also just comforting someone, confidence, and stuff like that. So I think if you can get somebody who's well-rounded, who has a little bit of everything, maybe some diversity in their careers too, where they can say, oh, well, I tried this, here's some of the challenge. And I think the best mentors will also be the ones that, at least for me, if I can relate to you, then I can tell you like, I did this, but knowing this about your personality and mine being that similar, here's where I struggled because of that personality trait. So I think it's good when you can have a mentor who's actually identifying things in themselves that they see in themselves. So I've always enjoyed that aspect.
How much of that is you just simply built a good relationship with the person who was more senior than you, and they saw something in you, you maybe asked for advice on a thing, but like how much of that is just over time you're having your weekly, monthly check-in with the person and bringing up topics and asking their opinion, versus like this question feels like, should I reach out to Dave, who I worked with 2 years ago, who's in the job I want to be in, and should I ask him to mentor me? Like the way the question's phrased to me is like a very explicit, like I want to find a person and ask them to mentor me. And I've never done it that way. I know people who've done that.
But it's a feature on LinkedIn, right? Like you can go and request a mentor on LinkedIn.
Is it really?
I believe so, yeah, because I've got a few. I think I've
Interesting.
got like 2 or 3 on the go right now. And I don't talk to them as frequently because once they get established, it's like they generally don't need you as
Sure.
much, right? But then, they lose a job or something, they'll start pinging you. But yeah, I enjoy it. I mean, I've always enjoyed that, especially the interns, right? Because I remember,
Sure.
it's funny because I was just talking about this with another tech leader. I remember walking into the office really early morning, and there's one of the interns was in, and she was a release engineer. So she was just cherry picking and branching and blah, 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 building the release packages, really just horrible stuff that you shouldn't be doing in this day and age. But I looked at like the way she sort of like charted everything and all of her notes. She used to handwrite notes, which I thought was odd. Like you got a computer, like where you handwrite, but it was color coded and it was organized, and she would chart by hand. And I was like, why are you doing this? Like, wouldn't you be better like like information systems? Like, don't you want to get in like look at your information that you're providing here? And I've always loved that, like capturing someone early enough to say, don't go down this route. Like, look how talented you are. Like, look at this.
Right.
And that's what I've always liked about mentorship. I also think I had a sleazy mentor once, and he was awesome. Don't get me wrong. But I remember one time, like he used to have me do stuff like, hey, I want you to buy all the engineers pizza. And I'd be like, yeah, but I don't have a corporate card, right? So like that's $400. I don't have $400 because I'm like a kid who just started. And he was just sleazy. He was a sleazy guy. But again, he was like Ivy League. I learned a lot from him, but I had to reduce my expectations because I'm like, yeah, I didn't like most of this stuff is not useful, but a couple of tidbits in here that I'll keep. Buy pizza for people once in a while and find somebody else to pay for it. But yeah, I like the mentorship thing. I actually, one of the apps I've always wanted to write was the what are they reading? And I just wanted to be able to go and like I wanted to be able to look at an energized leader like Musk and just see that digital trail and just say, cool, right? Like I want to read the same things as Bill Gates. And they'll often just post on LinkedIn, these are the 5 books I'm reading, similar kind of thing, right? But yeah, I like it. I like to tap into like the old people and see what they've learned.
Nice. All right. Coco Poporo 101, fixing bugs all the time. I feel like I'm stuck in a loop where I'm uncovering new problems, debugging the issues, and then redirecting them to devs every single day. And it's taking the creative energy out of me. I feel very negative about work now as I'm always getting hit with urgent issues that need to be resolved, and I feel a sense of ownership over the problems. Any advice on how I can overcome this feeling and what I can do better as a product manager? And one of the replies in the Reddit thread was from Ratzar, which was, a bug does not mean it's urgent. The existence of a bug does not mean you drop everything to fix the bug. I'm trying to think, what is it, you or Paul who uses the example of like Oracle at any given time has 3,500 open bug tickets in its backlog? Like bugs are not an indication of the next thing you need to work on. And I think that is my number one advice to every product manager, product owner, engineering teams, which is bugs may be critical and they may be a blocker and they may be maybe a thing you do need to drop everything for, but you should not just assume the presence of a bug means you need to change your priority and go and do a bunch of stuff. Bugs absolutely can continue to exist, and depending on who they're impacting and the size of the workaround for the user, if there is a workaround, if there's a manual process, if there's a back-end thing that someone can do on their behalf, there are a ton of cases where bugs are going to live for quite some time. And I don't know, I've been in situations where people are like, oh, the bug tracking system has like the age of the bug and we're going to be evaluated on how old this bug is. And I'm like, that is not a good measure. I do not care how old that bug is. I want to know the impact and the size and the scope of the bug, and then you can tell me that there's a high critical blocker that's been around for more than however long you want to say is good or bad. I don't know. This one, my recommendation is stop doing this. This is a bad use of your time. You need to actually prioritize and do what a product manager should do, which is evaluate value, impact, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, what kind of testing do you have too if like your whole world is just
Yeah, how many of these are you finding?
yeah, like what and again it's environmental, right? Too is this person at started was like, no shit, of course there's gonna be bugs. Like even the
Right.
CEO's in there looking at bugs right now, right? Like, or is it a big company and they've got caught in the vicious cycle of like quality's dropping, the speed of release, so the QA and the testing is not there, so it's getting out and it's critical because they're meeting customer expectations, and then they're just sort of bulking up on maintenance and people finding stuff in production and then testing live, right? Like, yeah, culturally, do you want to be there long term? Probably not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard with this one because it could be a lot of different issues for it, right?
Well, and also you and I have been in situations where we purposefully did things like bug bounties, where we went and found as many bugs as we could and incentivized a bunch of people to go into the systems and find all of them. The goal of that wasn't to then immediately have all of those bugs fixed. It was to understand the scope of the gaps and identify the places that we needed to improve on. So, like, yeah, who is sending you all of these bugs and for what reason? And you need to push back on the expectation if it's being set for you that that's a thing you need to immediately respond to.
Yeah, it just constantly baffles me as to why companies don't get creative with sort of issues we all experience. Again, these are issues that every company we've ever been at, right? Like varying degrees of severity, but like the bugs, like you mentioned, like we did that for a multitude of reasons. It also pulled in people who'd never really used the app and tested it into understanding
Right.
it even more. It's like, oh yeah, it took the opportunity to get a little extra cash to do a little extra work because it was on top of their other stuff too, right? But they happily did it. I think I often, every single big company I've ever been at, I'm like, why do you create a backlog of your biggest issues, put a dollar price on it, and open season that shit, right? And if
Right.
some 18-year-old kid goes and fixes your biggest issue on a weekend, give them the 20K. Give them the 20K.
I
And
don't know
if
that it
that
should be
same
20K, but
18-year-old
yeah.
kid next weekend tackles problem number 2 and fixes it in a weekend, give them the 15K. And if they make 150K in bonus at the end of the year, cool. They were your biggest part. I don't understand why companies can't get creative, especially because they're so poor at actually quantifying when bonuses, often revenue is tied to it, but like, how do you quantify
Right.
whether someone had a good year? Like we're always talking about how the performance reviews and that whole process is, well, yeah, I was doing the reviews at a bad time in my life where everything was negative. So I forgot all the good stuff they did for the last year. If you could like look at real metrics, like, hey, look at this person doing all this extra work from this backlog of stuff, but people don't get creative. Companies don't. Yeah, they sort of feel like it's, I don't know, it feels like it's the homeopathic approach. Like, oh, well, that's feel good. It's like, guess what? So was agile. That was the most feel good shit you ever embraced, right? But yeah, I do not understand why companies don't get creative on better quality, better education. That's a big one I've been thinking about recently. Companies that acquire tech that is a paradigm shift, that don't invest in the paradigm shift at the intellectual level,
Right.
danger, danger, danger.
Yep. Oh man, these Reddit usernames, Differdin2, continuous retrospective, and they provide a whole series of definitions we can discuss here about the concept of a continuous retrospective.
I think it's Differdin. Deferred
Cool.
into.
Deferred into.
Deferred into.
Cool. But they boil it down to the key is to create a culture where the team feels empowered to raise concerns or ideas continuously rather than waiting for a scheduled retrospective. Depending on the urgency or impact of an issue, you can either have a regular session or bring the team together when needed for focused discussion. Ultimately, it's the mindset of problem solving and continuous improvement that matters. And I think this kind of goes back to what I was just talking. Oh, I don't know if I can say it goes back to because I don't know how I'll edit this episode together. But I've talked about in the past the sort of management style of I'm not going to wait for our quarterly performance review to tell you what you did bad or the thing that you did well, and that's why the bonus is blah blah blah. Like I'm going to give you the feedback immediately. I do think that like having people wait and like sprint retrospectives don't always happen every sprint. There are teams who do retrospectives like monthly or even quarterly, and that is way too long to wait. And so yeah, I'm on board with the idea of continuously providing the feedback. I think this probably also goes back to our agile conversation where agile teams are supposed to be self-forming and self-regulating and adapting and changing if it's not working for them. No one does that. Agile doesn't work that way today. You have a Scrum and you do Scrum and you just are stuck doing Scrum the way the person who decided to implement it decided that you all should work, and teams don't get to be self-forming and provide this kind of feedback. So I'm not sure, like my overall thought on this is sure, continuous retrospective, great idea. That's how you should be working in general. No team is being agile actually and adapting their process. So it feels a little bit like a thought exercise that I wish more people, maybe this goes to our larger agile 2.0 conversation. Who's going to do this? No one does this. Agile isn't agile.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because the challenge with the retrospectives is, or my experience of some of the challenge with retrospectives is, within a very short space of time after the team, and you know, teams that are good at actually taking the action items out of retrospective and making those changes quickly get starved of the control. So the issues start to then be beyond the team, but in your retrospective, who's going to go take that away and figure out the problems external to the team that you can change as part of your
Right.
process? And so that is the challenge. Like when you come to a big company who's trying to do something like Scrum, like uniform Scrum, where it's like, no, we didn't just let all the teams sort of self-form and pick their own agile. They fall into this model, and it's like, yeah, but all the retrospective things that they want to fix are now beyond them.
Right.
So they've fixed all the little tiny problems that they could not really meaningful. They have no value in these changes. But for them to change something to the next level requires them to break your framework. So,
right. Yeah, maybe this is a good example of like you're in a startup with 7 engineers on the team and you truly can be self-forming and self-regulating. Then yeah, I would think don't wait for ceremonies, just talk about the process things that are going wrong. But yeah, as soon as you get into there's multiple teams, there's multiple dependencies, the thing that's blocking them is a process problem that has to do with the actual overall organization, then it doesn't matter. I think there's a tool in Jira that some of our teams are using that is anonymous feedback, so you can go in and just provide, because that's also one of the things that interferes with the feedback process is the person who wants to criticize their manager or 2 of their coworkers for not following the following steps doesn't want to do it because it would be tied back to them. So making it anonymous and that kind of stuff, there's a limit to what human beings are going to do in response to this that is either in their control or they don't feel like they want to rock the boat with other people that they have to work with every day. Yeah, I like the idea, but I'm not sure a bunch of teams are ready to do this.
yeah, you reminded me of something then, but then I lost it. But I was just thinking, I think I was thinking back to when we were startup, and yeah, you do, you can adapt on the fly, and you can huddle, and you can say, hey, we were just talking about this. Does everybody agree? Like going forward, we can do this. Like, okay, well, let's do it this way this Friday, and then next sprint we're gonna try this, right? And
Right.
God, I can't remember the last time I did that kind of agile. It really does.
No.
It really is going back to startup when you had that true flexibility where you're like, I feel agile.
Right.
Like I understand my our velocity. I know he does 7 points, but I know his 7 points are actually like,
Right.
5 of his. It's interesting. Like, yeah, big companies and agile.
Yeah, big companies aren't agile, and I've been thinking about this because we've been running into some stuff and where we work in terms of team structure and how you can be most effective when you have to have cross-team dependencies. And I do kind of keep coming back to I wish there was a version of this where you just had like 8 people dedicated, 1 UX, 1 product, 6 engineers, right? Like and you're all just fully self-contained, and you all all can just make whatever decisions you need to within your thing. And I think part of maybe the problem with that is as platforms get bigger, that just physically doesn't scale as you want to do more. And there's this weird balancing act of like, it kind of goes back to, I don't think we ever actually did the episode on data product owners, right? Which is like, is there a version of a platform in which features can truly operate independently of one another unless you also have an enterprise architecture team that has its own engineers providing the backbone? Because as soon as team A and team B need to have their two features be dependent on one another, and that's a perfectly common expectation in a sizable platform that does a bunch of things for people, it gets tricky. You have data contracts and you have a bunch of things that are dependent on one another. I don't know what I think my answer is. Do I think my answer is stop offering features to clients for 7 of their problems, just deliver a single feature that solves one of their problems perfectly? No enterprise company is going to do that. Enterprise companies want to say yes to the client every single minute. I don't know. It's one of the things that's great about a startup. You know the exact problem you're trying to solve for the exact client you're trying to solve for it, and you got 7 people who are trying to do it, and all of this crap goes away.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting from an EA perspective. Like, and I have to see the articles fly by, like, oh, microservices are dead. Long live the monolith. The monolith makes its return. I'm
Right.
like, I don't even know what that means. We didn't even get rid of the monolith. We haven't had enough time. You're talking about, yeah, we build a bunch of microservices. Yeah, fine, but there's still the monoliths. They never went anywhere. But yeah, I think about that a lot now. Like with the big companies, it's so hard. It's so hard to figure out. Like, 'cause you always go in there with like a vision of standardizing, like, oh, cool, I'm gonna have an enterprise gateway and we're gonna have standards. But again, it's like you've got to pay just as much attention to the onboarding and the training and documentation and the order in which you roll those things out. And like the companies are so ill prepared. Like, hey, we're gonna move into this tech, and it's like, yeah, but you need to train your existing staff, and you're gonna need new stuff. Like the profile of your people changes. Like if the DNA of your tech changes, the DNA of
Right.
your people change. It has to change. Like,
Well,
it has
and
to.
there's versions of that don't need the DNA to change. There's versions of that which is just a little bit, and this is I think what I keep coming back to is I feel bad wanting to be a process dictator, but it's like, yeah, actually the way this is going to work is you don't get the infinite flexibility you want as engineers. You all can solve the problem however you want it, but what I'm going to tell you need to do is you have a milestone you need to set at which you've defined the data contract. And then when you define that data contract, you have to adhere to it and tell all of the other teams who are going to be dependent on it that they can actually, use that. And engineers want this, and product people want to adapt and be able to say, well, okay, but then we realize this requirement means that the contract needs to change. That's fine. But then I don't know, do I need a PMO org helping all of the teams with change management and distributing the fact that the data contract is now version 1.1 and I need all of you to go and adapt I don't know. I fall immediately into like a process nerd problem, and no one likes the process nerd, but it's why cross-team dependencies suck. It's why these massive enterprise organizations can't adapt quickly, because you don't want to tell the engineers and the product people and all of the people involved in the process, like, yeah, you gotta actually follow a little bit of structure and rigidity.
We haven't actually done the data mesh episode yet, but we'll talk
Right.
a lot about this during the data mesh episode. The data mesh, a lot of those challenges, I think Jamak, who is the author of the principles behind the data mesh, sort of harps on about in a lot of the literature, right? Like it's funny in a way too, because when I look at the data mesh, and we won't get too much into it now because we haven't really give you the definition for listeners, but I often thought about, like, I spent a lot of my leadership years in the first 10 years sort of talking about like how do we tear the walls down between the silos. And actually the interesting thing with the data mesh and concepts similar to that is, or some of the principles similar to the mesh concepts are, you're not actually tearing down the silos, you're actually providing them with sort of self-service infrastructure, and then the ability to sort of work in the data ecosystem, and addressable data products, how to find them, like a catalog to understand what data you're using, schema registry for versioning, and then data contracts between different areas of the platform. Then you might decide you go, I'm going to go the streaming mesh. So you add real time and a backbone to it. And a lot of these technologies are complementary but complex, right? Like, oh, okay, am I going JSON
Right.
or Avro? Am I the schema registry? Am I spotting backwards compatibility? So it's really challenging, but not insurmountable. But again, it's so interesting. Like the more I talk to companies like who are like, hey, we want to talk to you about the work on data mesh, or I want to talk to you about streaming technology and stuff like that, the more I talk about the organization and their willingness to change to support, right? And really make sure the success of a new tech or the success of a project, like, yeah, we have to move from a monolith to microservices or microservices to monolith. It's like, how much are you going to support that effort, right? Like, so often my question. And it's difficult too, because again, early in your career, you often say the words, but you don't know what they mean until later when you're really struggling, because you're closer. You can feel it where you're like, I need top-down buy-in, right? And I always wondered what that meant as a kid when I'd hear it. Like, what do they mean? And I knew what they meant. Like, yeah, we need the executives to really be on board with this. But actually, what they were looking at, they needed more than that. They needed it to be organic day to day. That same message where when my CTO walked in at Thomson and in finance, like it was like a slogan he would say, and we all knew what he meant, right? Like we were all chasing that same vision. Great communicator. That's a challenge. Big challenge. Huge.
Yep.
Okay. Next question is from Burbell 2013.
We think 2013 is when they signed up for their username, because that can't be the birth year. One, I don't think Gen Z does birth year. So 2013 has to be when they created the Reddit account, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Burbell 2013 asks, ServiceNow for an EA tool. Okay, I did this one because I did look at ServiceNow as an EA tool, and
Sure.
I can just tell you why we didn't. Cost.
It sounds baffling.
Yeah.
Is it even in the running? Is it like it's a weird, like, I get that like it said at some point Salesforce actually invested in the marketing cloud, but for a good like 10 years there, people were like, Salesforce is my email tool. And I'm like, oh my God, why? Like ServiceNow, I'm sure there's technically tasks and tickets, but that seems like a bad EA tool.
So it goes back to the meta model. It's great because a bunch of your other meta model is already in there, right? So if IT are in there doing their
Sure.
IT tickets and they've got like their asset repository and configuration management database, it can actually be really good, because then, remember I was saying, like, if your enterprise service teams all have their own processes,
Right, sucks.
yeah, sometimes it's in ServiceNow. And part of our reason for not going to ServiceNow was, one, cost. Two, we weren't super impressed with like the meta model beyond what the EA tool. So it's like, cool, we got some of the IT stuff, but there's a lot of other stuff missing from the meta model. And that related to the third reason, which was we wouldn't be in control of the system. And we wanted to be able to structure the meta model as we grow. And quite often ServiceNow is sort of in IT's hands instead of architecture or engineering's. So yeah, the last one's not acceptable. I'm quite aware of that, but sometimes anti-patterns have to be.
I will say, for this question asker though, seems like the company is just introducing enterprise architecture for the first time. And so I am sort of curious, is this like baby's first meta model? It's okay that ServiceNow doesn't do all of the advanced stuff. If you are starting out and you already have a ServiceNow contract for the rest of your IT, is there a benefit to people who want to just start some enterprise architecture stuff? Or would you recommend people still, on your first day of EA, do a full vendor evaluation?
You can still succeed with. I often say this, right? Like, there's no make or break between ServiceNow and some of the other tools like RDoc or LeanIX, right?
Sure.
Like, you can still build a successful EA. Part of your journey is going to be, again, what's the quality of the rest of the meta model? So if the company you're at has done a lot in ServiceNow, then yeah, there's potentially a lot of value turning on ServiceNow, especially if you don't have the challenges like we did, right? From a fiscal point of view and then a control point of view. If that's something that, maybe the IT team you're working with is like, yeah, actually we have good collaboration and we build the ServiceNow workflows together. I will say this about ServiceNow. I think it suffers from the same challenge that Jira does, right?
Sure.
The flexibility to build like all those forms. It's great when you get the end product, but it can be a challenge to bootstrap all that from the beginning, right?
Sure.
But I'd say ServiceNow is better than nothing. Nothing is horrendous. Nothing is what I've seen most big companies have. And then, well, I shouldn't say nothing, but it's like this girl has an Excel spreadsheet, this dude has a Confluence doc, and then collectively somebody is doing updates every other couple of weeks and putting a slide deck together manually. And I've seen all versions of that for the last 25 years. This tool, ServiceNow, would actually, yes, if you can get the right data in there, now you've got live dashboards of the projects. So yeah, better than nothing, but not a big fan. Not a big fan.
All right, cool.
But hey, Burbell, you just passed TOGAF level 1 and 2. Like, give me a call.
What is TOGAF?
Give us a call. It's the open framework, architecture framework. So
Okay.
generally, like it's a nice vanilla way to start. You'd have to implement all of it. But TOGAF is like the framework, highlighting the business architecture, technical architects, and yeah, it's good. Actually, you might be interested in taking a look at it, Kevin. It's I think you'd enjoy it.
Listen, all of my certifications have happened because I've tricked a company into paying for them. So sure, if our current company wants to support that, I'll go for it.
I'm looking at TOGAF or one of the other frameworks in 25, and I'll certainly share that with you. But I think it'd be great for you, somebody like you on the product side too.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. To read articles that we've written on similar topics to the ones we talk about here, head over to the blog at acceptancepod.com. You can also follow us on most apps. We're at AcceptancePod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog over there.
We're also building a community on Reddit at r/acceptancecriteria, or you can find us on Discord. Once there, you'll find links to show notes and other artifacts you'll find on our blog. We promise to moderate the heck out of anything submitted to the team to keep it a nice little slice of the internet.
For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at kthomaseuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER, and this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.